Development Center, where we focus on all things accessibility. I'm also the co-chair of the North Carolina Higher Education Digital Accessibility Collaborative with Eudora, and we try to get together and share all our accessibility knowledge with each other. So today you're going to get some instruction on accessible document basics with Erin McCully. And Erin's the director of Learning Accessibility and Equity at Southwestern Community College in Sylva, North Carolina, a beautiful town in the mountains. She started in the education field by teaching K-12 music and chorus, and she eventually made her way to instructional design and e-learning. While working at Southwest in the e-learning department, she got involved with Southwest Web Accessibility Plan and began learning as much as she possibly could about digital accessibility. She does great work with her faculty to make instruction and materials more inclusive and accessible. So I'm going to let Erin take it away, and she's going to give you some good instruction on accessible document basics. Good afternoon, Erin, and take it away, please.
Okay, can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you. When I started the screen share, things got a little bit wild over here in Zoom land, so thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate you coming back after the break, after lunch, and not giving up. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to talk about accessible document basics. I do have to say thank you to the folks at the collaborative who have asked me to do this and also prepared this whole conference. I've learned a lot already, and I hope you have too. You may hear a few things you've heard before. It can't hurt to give a little bit of review, but please feel free to use the chat for the Q&A. I'm sorry, use the Q&A, not the chat, for your questions, and we will try to stop periodically. Darren will tell me to shut up for a minute if I need to address something, but I do want to say, while I do work in accessibility, digital accessibility especially, as someone in an earlier presentation said, I am not an expert. Sometimes you just kind of end up being the default expert at your institution because you happen to know more than some other people. Doesn't mean you know everything. And so that's where I am. I just spent some time this morning looking up why links should be set to open in the same window and not set to open in a new tab. Learning a lot about that. So just know we're all in this together. We don't all have the answers. So that being said, one of the things I do for my job is that I review hybrid and online courses for accessibility, and then I give folks an opportunity to update one category of stuff. We use Moodle, so I give them an opportunity to update Moodle content or documents, PowerPoints, video, or audio. And in my experience, when folks choose the documents category, they really get the biggest bang for their buck, the biggest payoff for the amount of effort that they are putting in. So I'm excited to be here, and I hope you get something out of this. So our first slide here is about objectives. We're going to talk about accessible text in documents, how to create accessible document structure with headings and lists, and then incorporating accessible images, tables, and hyperlinks in a document. So you probably already know this now because you've been to some of the other sessions today, but why should we make documents accessible? Something I recently learned is that students actually cite accessibility and accessible materials as very important in their online courses, even if they do not identify as having a disability. This may not surprise you because you've attended some of the other sessions today, but I thought that was really cool. There's a source link in there. And by the way, the presentation is available to you. I believe they probably added that slides link into the chat, but also there is a list of resources at the end of this presentation. Secondly, it's easier to make your documents accessible if you start from scratch right? It's easier to make your documents when you make them accessible. Word has so many built-in tools, I couldn't even begin to tell you what they all do. I'm betting no one here is a Microsoft Word expert, maybe except for Darren Evans, but it can make your life easier when you start from scratch and make it accessible. It also, of course, increases access for your students. You want your stuff to be as accessible as possible for your students so they learn. I know that's why you're here. And then I love this, proactive versus reactive. If you have not encountered a student or a user trying to access your materials who has a disability, you will. It will happen, and it's way better to be proactive than reactive. So continuing on. So just wanted to give you a couple notes here. We're going to talk today about Microsoft Word, but these ideas apply to other document formats too. We got Google Docs, you got EPUBs, the Pages documents in Apple, PowerPoint, websites. The techniques you use may be different for each of these, but the principles remain the same. Speaking of techniques, there is more than one way to do all of these things. I am certain that some people in this session know other ways than what I will describe. It doesn't mean they're wrong, it just means there are multiple ways to do stuff. And then just remember that even if you make your document what you consider accessible, there may still be individuals out there who need something different. They may need additional modifications. I'll take a brief moment to thank Darren Evans for giving me some resources to start this PowerPoint, and he included this image in his original presentation, and I don't know if you've seen it before, but it is something to consider. So on this slide, it shows one of those cartoons, a single panel, and it shows a gentleman shoveling snow off of a set of stairs, and there are some children waiting to go into the school, and there's a child in a wheelchair, and the child asks, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And the person shoveling says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." And the student says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." So as you make your material more accessible, consider that it's not just for a student who happens to have a disability, but in fact, it makes everybody else's life easier too. So here's some basics for accessible documents. So they should, overall, I know it looks like a lot, but I promise it's not. They should have some kind of structure. They should have alt text and image descriptions, strong color contrast, structured tables and lists, readable fonts, and meaningful hyperlinks. And if you don't know what any of that is, don't worry, we'll get to it. Alternative text is I'm sure you've heard a lot of this today, but alternative text refers to short, concise, written descriptions that convey the meaning and the function of images in their context. It is crucial for those who can't see an image either because of a disability or technology limitation, such as a page that doesn't load very quickly, or as we heard in an earlier presentation, people might be on their work computers and those may block images. And if you're not a person with visual impairments who has a browser that blocks images, you won't see a difference from your side if alt text has been added to an image, but it does provide information to those who use a screen reader and others. I found this, I love this. We love memes, but it's a picture of text. And you should know that not all screen readers can read text that is embedded in an image. So to make this image more accessible, we should add some alt text. But this image says, got a beautiful picture of a sunset on the beach. And it says, "Congratulations, without alt text, you failed to inspire 10% of the people." Haven't actually confirmed that 10% is the correct percentage there, but just keep in mind, you may add images to your documents that you think are fantastic, but if we don't have alternative text, we cannot convey the meaning of those images. What types of images might you be including in your documents? Well, you might include decorative images, content images and example images. We'll dive into decorative images. So I see a lot of this in our faculty's courses and their materials. They love to put in an image that is beautiful, eye-catching. It's not necessarily helpful for instruction or content, but it is beautiful. So these are images that are placed in your content for decoration. They have no purpose other than decoration. So if the image was removed, it wouldn't change anything for the student in any way in terms of content or instruction. So for instance, this picture of a sunset, you can mark your alt text as sunset, or you can mark it as decorative. When you use the decorative option in your alt text, it can, the screen reader will recognize that it doesn't even need to talk about that image to the user who's using the screen reader. But most faculty are probably using example images or the next type of images. So in this case, example images serve as an example of the concept you're teaching. So our example on this page is a marble statue of Benjamin Franklin, and it's outside the National Memorial. So say that the text on your slide or your Word document said, to remember the life and accomplishments of Benjamin Franklin, he is commemorated in a number of ways. So this image serves as an example of one way he is commemorated. So for the alt text for this image, I would say a marble statue of a seated Benjamin Franklin located outside the National Memorial. Pretty straightforward, and it instructs the student on what the image is even there for. What's the purpose? Our next image, I love me some Vermeer, so I chose a picture of his girl with the pearl earring. And these are content images. So these are images that are part of your content. Content images are probably going to require a longer description to explain the significance of the image. So if I'm teaching an art history course, which by the way, I should not ever do because I know very little, but I would guess that if I'm using this image in class, I am trying to convey something about light and color and composition. So my description for this image will probably be something that only an art historian could write about, but that would be an example of content-based images, things that if I removed this, the rest of the content would make no sense. And here, in my experience, is an example of something that a lot of faculty will stumble over. So many of us, maybe you, I certainly did before I knew, I would look for a chart or a graph that represented something I needed to share. And I would go to images.google.com and I would find an image of a graph or a chart. Those are not accessible, not least because the images often have text on them, but also because it is very challenging to have a screen reader read that information in a way that's going to help a screen reader user. So descriptive alt text or captions can adequately convey the meaning of your information. Sometimes, not all the time. If you have a relatively simple graph, like the one that I have here, or chart rather, my alt text for this chart within this slide presentation says something like, a chart indicating that 50% of people love pizza, etc. However, if you have a math statistics chart, then I recommend you speak with Darren Evans, who has worked very hard on an accessible math guide. But just know that this is something I see a lot of, but it's possible to create charts and graphs right within your document. It takes a little bit more time, but it does create a more accessible tool. Google Docs also does this pretty well, and it can link to a Google Sheet even as you create your representation visually of the information you need to share. It's a complex maneuver if you're not used to doing it, meaning if you're not used to making a graph or a chart that way, manually, it can be challenging, but the tools are out there, and I've linked them at the end of this presentation. So we're going to take a step back and go a little bit easier for a moment. Accessible font style. I don't know if you all remember, but it used to be really, really fashionable to use very scripty fonts, meaning that they're very decorative fonts on websites. Lord, in the 90s, some of those websites would not have passed accessibility expectations today. But I would recommend that as you choose your fonts for your documents, choose something that's easy to read. Don't put up a barrier to your users by using the fanciest font that you can find. You want your students to take in the information, so don't put up a barrier that makes it slightly harder. We recommend sans serif fonts, which means without serifs. So I put an example of Times New Roman here. Now, Times New Roman is not a bad font. It's not evil. It's just an example of a font that has serifs. And generally, when reading online, people have said that it is easier to read a font that doesn't have those little fancy extra lines. Like on the T, there's a little line down on each end of the top of the T, and at the bottom, there's a little extra line. So standard font examples include Arial, Trebuchet, if I'm saying that correctly, Verdana, and Calibri. And please be consistent in your sizes and your style. Then I'll show you what that looks like here in a couple minutes. But my next one talks about accessible font color. We heard about color and color contrast earlier in one of the other sessions, so this might be review, but you may not be aware, there's a significant percentage of folks who struggle to read certain types of material due to color blindness or some kind of visual impairment. Also, our ability to see color decreases as we age, so that's something fun to continue to look forward to. So my examples show black font, light blue, dark green, and others. And y'all, we love color because color is fun. However, I would caution you to not use so much color that it gets in the way of the students being able to see or comprehend what you're trying to share with them. And also make sure that your color contrast is distinct enough that students won't struggle to read your content. Here's an example. So I have 4 examples listed on this page, and one is the top example uses highlighting of multiple colors. We've got like maybe 5 different colors there. I'm not against highlighting, but I would recommend that you use only one color of highlighting. I wonder if you're looking at this screen and your eyes kind of go a little wonky as you try to decipher what I have written there. My second example shows how challenging it can be to read a word when each of the letters is a different size. Maybe you don't do this, maybe you've seen it before, but it makes one more barrier for students to understand what you're trying to tell them. The third example shows multiple colors used within one word, within 2 words, if you will. And the fourth example shows different fonts being used. It can look super cool, I guess. However, I would encourage you to only use up to 3 different styles of font, whether that's you're gonna use black font with no highlighting, and then you're gonna use maybe bolded red font to draw attention to the text. And maybe another example, maybe you're gonna use bright blue font. But I would minimize the number of things you're gonna do, because if you make everything cool and different, they're not going to know what to focus on in your document. This is a great example from Darren, and I had to use it. This is something that you might have heard of before, but it's a little bit different. Do not use color alone to convey information. So I'm not going to tell you never use red font, or never use green font, or never use highlighting. But what I will say is, for someone who can't see the difference between red and green, they need some other indicator to tell them the difference between the information that's in red and the information that's in green. So if you want to donate your paycheck, you can sign next to the green signature text. If you want to keep your money, you have to sign next to the red one. Well, if I'm colorblind, that is not going to help me one bit, unfortunately. So instead, you might be able to, use bold font. Oftentimes I'll tell folks when they're going through the accessibility review, it's great that you want to use dark purple to signify something important, just make it bold as well. So for someone who cannot see colors or cannot distinguish between them easily, they can see that that is still important. Okay. Our next section is about building document structure. And this has a number of components, and I hope you're all still with me. It is, this one is something that is an example of how we can make our stuff more accessible. And if we do it from the beginning, it is easier for us, and it turns out to be easier for almost all of our users. So somebody mentioned in an earlier session today, the idea of creating headings in their document. And she talked about how she created heading 4 for all of her headings. She went into the styles area and created heading 4s for all the things that she wanted to look important. And I thought, well, man, that's better than what I used to do, because what I used to do is I would just highlight the stuff I wanted to be important as a heading, and I would just hit that little up arrow on the A button to make it really big. But I didn't know. I didn't know that that wasn't the best way to create a heading. So what I was doing something that for a sighted person made sense. Made sense to me. I could see that that topic was important because it had been, upped to like size 20 font. But for someone using a screen reader or someone who likes to use the outline tool in Microsoft Word, that information was not helpful at all. They had no idea that I had made it a heading in my own mind. So as you set about creating a structure for your document, consider, do you have a title? Are there topics? Are you going to use subtopics? And just know that the heading styles not only are good for students using a screen reader, but there are some students who may be using keyboard navigation, meaning that they cannot use a mouse or choose not to use a mouse to navigate through documents. And those, of course, using screen readers. So this navigation will be much improved when you use heading styles. So in order to create a hierarchy, you have to figure out what's important. So this is just an example here on the left where I put my heading 1 in bold using the headings feature. And then I might have the heading size 2 and heading size 3 and 4 are both smaller as well. So you have multiple heading options. And making sure I didn't miss anything, I'm headed on. So don't be like me, don't be like old me and just highlight the text at the top of your page and hit the up button on the text size. Instead, highlight that top of the page, whatever you want to be your heading, and you can go into the styles menu, which I have a picture up here that shows the styles option outlined in blue, and then also the heading 1 option, which is also outlined in blue. So that will establish it as the most important information in the document, or at least the header. And then you can continue on your way with assigning other things to be headers as well. So I also have a Mac, so I thought it might be helpful to give you a screenshot of what that looks like as well. So here's a screenshot of my Word document in a Mac. So you're going to highlight that and go to styles and choose heading 1 as well. Now, if you hate the look of the styles that are automatically set up for you, you can create your own styles. And like, for instance, in Microsoft Word, oftentimes the styles for heading 1 and maybe one of the other headings are light blue. Not super accessible in terms of color or contrast. So I have set my default style settings to have my headings be in black font. So there's a way to set that up. And again, there are resources at the end of this document. But it would take a long time if I told you how to do every single thing. So I hope that that's okay. So I mentioned earlier that some students may want to use the navigation pane or the outline tool. And I've got a picture up here on the slide that shows both the Microsoft version or the PC version and the Mac version. So as you add headings and establish those, you can check your work in the navigation tool and see, does this make sense? Does this hierarchy look right? And remember, some students, some users may be using this tool already, and it will help them navigate your document. Okay, here's one of my favorite topics, is making your URLs short and descriptive. So here's another example of something that past Erin did not do well. I thought, and I think someone mentioned this earlier too, that either copying and pasting your link into a document was just fine, or if you wanted to be really cool, you would change it to say, click here. And then I learned that if you use a screen reader, the screen reader will read out a list of links from a website or from a document, and it will just say, click here, click here, click here. And that's not very helpful for someone using a screen reader. And also, as I've updated my technique, I have grown to like how clean it looks from a sighted person's perspective to see a descriptive link in my documents, because I know exactly where that link is going to take me. So in order to create a meaningful link, and this shows a Mac version in Microsoft Word, but you can just decide to, whichever text you decide, your short and informative information, you're going to highlight that with your mouse or however you highlight. And then it will bring up a little text box when you hit Command K or Control K, where you can right click and choose Insert Link. And then you can paste the actual text, the hyperlink, into the address bar and then click OK. And that is a super easy way to update your links and make them look really classy. But this is a good example of how you can do make something more accessible, and yet you can do it like 50 different ways. I'm sure you all have your preferred way of creating a hyperlink in your documents. The next thing we're talking about is accessible tables. This is another one that trips up our faculty here quite a bit. There are a number of pitfalls in the table tool if you are not creating it from scratch. So creating it from scratch is the best way, but here is a table that I've created in the PowerPoint presentation directly. I've got headings on my tables. I've tried to use colors that still, look aesthetically pleasing to someone who can see, I hope. Maybe you have different color preferences, but the contrast is strong enough that even if you don't have great color vision, you are still able to perceive the content I'm trying to put in there for you. So here's a couple of tips. Avoid merging or splitting your table cells. I am not a screen reader user, so I am not an expert, but from what I understand, this can be very confusing to a screen reader user when table cells are merged or split. Then another important thing is, once you've established header rows on your table, you should also go into the table properties and repeat the header row at the top of the page. So I have a screenshot showing the table properties box, and there is a spot that you can check in order to ensure that everybody gets that it's a header row that's in there. That really helps folks who are using screen readers. So tables really are kind of tricky. Only focus on using tables when it really is a means of conveying relationships between your pieces of data. So not for a layout, not for layout purposes. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Did you know that you can add alternative text to your table? You can. I'm sure you're excited to hear this, but yes, you can add alt text, and we would recommend that you do that. And you can also create a title and caption for the table. Both of these are things that you can do with the table properties that are already in Microsoft Word. When I added a title or caption for a table, this one, for example, that I have a screenshot of in my slides, I did that not by just typing the words class schedule table above the table. I did that by going into the table properties area, and you'll see all the options in there. Use what Microsoft Word is giving you is the big lesson. Here's an example of using a table to create document columns. So this is all about, like, visually, the person wanted this to look visually a certain way, but this would not read well to someone using a screen reader or someone trying to navigate through Microsoft Word using a keyboard and tabbing through. So try to avoid using a table when you don't have to. The Microsoft Word support site, by the way, is excellent. And it has a lot of helpful information about how to use all the tools, including table tools, on their website. And I've linked to that at the end of the session. For some reason, I really geek out over accessible lists. I don't know if anyone else is an accessibility geek here. I'm guessing it's more than just a few. But this one is so easy to fix, and it's so that's why I think I find it satisfying. So oftentimes, you may encounter an unformatted list. In Microsoft Word, if you start making a list, it's going to format it correctly for you. But if you have copied and pasted a list that you created in some other tool, and you pasted it into Word, you may not get the formatted list that we need to ensure that it can be used by folks using a screen reader or navigating by keyboard. So in my examples, I have on the left side, there's a numbered list, and on the right side, there's an unnumbered list, and it has dashes. And the reason I can tell that these are not formatted properly is that, and you may notice this too, the lists are usually indented a little bit once they're formatted correctly. That doesn't always mean that they are formatted correctly, but it's a really good tip to me when I'm looking through a document. I can spot it usually if the list is not indented. So when you highlight the list, you may also be able to tell that it is not formatted correctly, because as you highlight the list, if it highlights the numbers and the bullet points or the dashes completely, you're able to see all of that highlighting, then it is probably not formatted correctly. However, once you format the list correctly, like on the right side, you can see that I've highlighted all that information, but the bullet points are not highlighted. That's another indication that it is correct. If the bullet points were highlighted, there might be something going on that can be fixed. So in order to actually update a list, to make it accessible, it's so easy. You just highlight your existing list and then choose the numbers or the bullet points up in the top ribbon of Microsoft Word, and it will do it for you. It's excellent. You might have to delete a couple extra numbers or dashes that are generated though. Okay, so I just gave you a heck of a lot of information. I think I'm doing okay on time. I wanted to mention though that you don't have to be an accessibility expert to check your own documents. There is the Microsoft Accessibility Checker, and there is another session that will dive much deeper into the accessibility checkers, and that is at 3 p.m. and that's with Chelsea. So please attend that to learn more. But hallelujah, Microsoft wants your stuff to be accessible. Google wants your Google Docs to be accessible. So there are things out there that will help you make your stuff more accessible. So I love the accessibility checker in Microsoft Office products, because You can click on the little item that it shows is not accessible, and it will take you right to that item in the document, and it tells you what to do to fix it. We love it. And then you've heard about PDFs earlier, and folks love PDFs when they are creating documents. They love them. And maybe you remember being told, hey, save your Word document syllabus as a PDF, because that way when students download it, they can't change it. They can't accidentally delete something important, or they'll be able to see it in the same format that you designed it in. And these are all reasonable things to want as an instructor. However, PDFs are often the least accessible option out there. But if you love a PDF, and I'm not saying, never use it, but if you love it, then there are ways to ensure that your PDF will be more accessible. And that is to save it using the save as option, and save your PDF as a best for electronic distribution and accessibility document, and then export your Word document to PDF. Please do not choose print and print as PDF. It will strip out all of the amazing accessibility work you have done. It will not include any of your alt text on images, and it won't include your heading information. So please, if you're going to use a PDF, please save it in the most accessible way possible. Okay, I think I did well on time. So in conclusion, your accessible documents should include accessible fonts. Please put alt text and meaningful descriptions with your images, and use the structure that's already built into Microsoft Word, using headings, using formatted lists, and creating tables and charts using the tools inherent in Word. And then update your links to make sure that they are meaningful links. I don't know if I mentioned, but if you've ever heard a screen reader read out a very long link, it can be very painful. So for everybody's sake, making them short and meaningful is very helpful. And now, obviously, I'm not going to identify each of these resources, but I really hope that if you're thinking, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to do that in the future, that you use this slide to give you some step-by-step directions, adding headings in Microsoft Word, but also using the titles and headings in Google Docs. So I tried to give information about how to add accessibility features in multiple document formats. I will give a shout out about PowerPoints real quick, because I have an extra minute or two. And if you're creating things in PowerPoint, use the tools already inherent in PowerPoint. So as you create a new slide, use everything that's built right in there for you. Use the templates that are already there, because they will be much more accessible than you deleting all the text boxes and creating your own. So I would just say there's more out there that's helpful, that's already built into our tools to make things accessible. We just have to learn how to use them. So I hope that was helpful. I want to give a special thank you to Darren Evans, who I mentioned a couple times, for his help and guidance in working on this presentation. And I'll see if do we have any questions?
Now's the time to ask questions. Just type them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll read those to Erin, and we'll get any of your questions you may have answered. Maybe something you'd like to go over again, or something that could be a little bit clearer. So type your questions in.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, Darren, if we're waiting for some questions, was there anything that you would want folks to know that you've encountered questions about in the past about documents?
All I'll say is I think one of the big things with Word is it's something that we learned by trial and error. Nobody's really, few of us have ever actually taken a Word class. So just by using the built-in features of Word, you're going to become more efficient using the software. And a side effect of really learning Word is you tend to get more accessible documents. So if you learn what that styles pane does, it's going to sort of make your document production a little more efficient. And a side effect is that you'll get, some more accessibility. Looks like we got a Q&A question. And it says, do you know why MS Office uses light blue for headings? I just realized today that this is a weird choice, and I'd be using it as a default thinking it was recommended. Well, I actually do know the answer to that question.
Take it away.
So just by accident, whenever I don't know something about accessibility, which is frequently, I just call up somebody who does and I ask them. So I talked to a young lady at Microsoft, and she said they designed it that way by accident early on in the history of Word, and they didn't want to dig back into the code to correct it. So it was just something they did a long time ago, that they just have not developed the resources to go back and fix.
That makes me think of the reason that folks get for other accessibility issues. Like, this is the way we've always done it. It'd be awfully hard to go back and change it. Just a little bit of commentary. I see we have a couple other questions that I am able to view, so I'll go ahead and answer. There was one in the chat about asking whether our institution offers document accessibility training. So the answer is yes, and I do that training, but it is not required. However, the accessibility review for online and hybrid courses is required. So oftentimes our folks get point of need training when their courses come up for review. And the review process is like, your course might come up every 5 years to be reviewed. So it's not like I'm reviewing every single course at our institution every semester, but folks do get that training when I say, hey, these documents are not accessible. Here's how you can update them. So I hope that helps, Cindy. And we had a question about InDesign, and I am not an InDesign expert, but I believe that one of the only options for InDesign exports may be PDFs. And I want to say, like, Rebecca might have some information on this. Maybe, would you be willing to answer that, Rebecca? You're still on mute.
I'm still on mute because I'm running the things behind the scene. I actually popped on just to make sure you got those questions. I actually do not use InDesign very much, so I can't help you on that question.
I do think that because InDesign, there are accessibility features built into InDesign, and although I do not use it, I have worked with someone who does in our marketing department, and she learned that you can add alt text and things like that. Thank you, Chelsea, for your chat information. And yes, no PDF may be completely 100% accessible to 100% of the people all of the time, but it's good to know that InDesign has some built-in accessibility features to create PDFs that are more accessible. Thank you, Chelsea.
And I just want to jump in, sorry. InDesign does let you output to EPUB. It's not a quick or painless process, but EPUBs give you a lot more functionality and accessibility than the PDF format.
Yes, and Darren is an EPUB. I hesitate to use the word expert, but he's definitely the expert, I think, in our room about EPUB. So thank you. And Jim, you asked about the equity bit. So in my job, I do equity trainings also. We focus on inclusive instruction, and some of my presentations have been pretty similar to the session that was held earlier at 11 a.m. I do a universal design for learning workshop that spans over the semester to help folks think more about inclusive instruction. And I'm hoping to expand on that this year and do some specifically like inclusive syllabus trainings and things like that. So while part of my job is definitely focused on the smaller accessibility pieces and barriers, reducing barriers, yes, we're also trying to, part of my job is to get broader and more inclusive instruction happening at the institution as well. I hope I answered that sufficiently. The next question was about the color ratios and how does one abide by them? So accessibility checkers can help, and we may know more about that when we get to the accessibility checker session, but there are some options. There was, in the earlier presentation, there was some information about using a color accessibility checker, and that was, I know that was included in one of the presentation slides, and I'm not sure if I included that in my sources slide. So I will see what I can find out about that and add it to the slides. And yes, text, right. So you make a very good point, anonymous attendee. Serif fonts, correct, are not recommended for web, but it is true that if you print, I should say this with a grain of salt. What I have read is that in print, serif fonts can be very readable and may even be preferred. So print and web is certainly different. And so I cannot speak to that specifically. I don't have any sources to cite on that front. But italics can be an issue if the font size is rather small. It can make it challenging to read. I will sometimes use bold instead of italics, but I don't know that there's any specific recommendations out there, and I'm going to look into that, and I'll update my slides with that information. And yes, you can use a lot of these tools when you create an email that goes to a more public audience, like a newsletter or announcement in Microsoft Outlook as well. I am not sure about how Microsoft Outlook is tied to Word. I don't know if all the features available in Outlook are the same as those that are available in Word, but I do know that in email you can, in my experience, add alt text to images, and you can do many of the features like formatted lists and short descriptive links in an email as well. I'm just not sure specifically about Outlook. Is there anybody who has Outlook information? I'll see if I can find out, and I'll add that too. And then someone in the chat wrote about the serif and the sans serif. So if you want to know more about the font, check out that information. Sharon says in the Q&A that yes, it is possible to do those things in Outlook. Thank you, Sharon. Excuse me. I was a little bit sick and I may lose my voice. Okay, infographics. Right, infographics are going to function a lot like charts and graphs. So infographics inherently are images, usually with text built in. They are information shown graphically. They are not accessible unless they have good alternative text or they have a good caption or long description. So Canva has accessibility features so that a person who needs accessible features can create things in Canva, but the end result in Canva, as far as I've been able to determine, is not usually accessible inherently in and of itself. So you would treat it just like another image of text, and you would ensure that you have good alternative text, or you have a text representation. For many folks who might use an infographic in their syllabus, I've seen that. I would just encourage them to provide a text-based alternative. So if someone needed a screen reader, they're more likely to get more out of getting that information via just text read out loud to them. And then, oh, thank you. I should have mentioned where I got my slide deck, and it is from, hold up. Yes, it's from slidesgo.com. And I will tell you that, first of all, I love it. It's slidesgo.com has a number of slide deck options that are more inclusive than perhaps other slide decks. In other words, the images that they use often show different types of people, and I really enjoy that. However, in order to make them accessible, those images, it's a little bit of a challenge. So you have to add a lot of alternative text when you want to use images from SlidesGo, but I highly recommend that, that tool. Have I gotten to everything?
I think we got to all the questions. Thank you so much, Erin, for this. It's a great presentation, and thank you, audience, for listening and for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will be taking a break until our next presentation.